Well, South African motorists are taking advantage of the lowest interest rates for 31 years, a market that offers more choice than ever before, and the affordability of models in the vehicle market that's being bolstered by competitive discounts by dealers and manufacturers alike. Joining us for a look at what's driving South Africa's car market is Keith Watson. He's head of sales for vehicle and asset finance at Standard Bank South Africa. Keith, thanks so much for joining us today. And of course, we've highlighted some of the factors that are pushing consumers in South Africa to buy more, but there's a good tug of war being played right now because this is within still a very trying economic climate. So give us an assessment of the kind of market we're looking at right now.
Yeah, you're right. It is trying, but consumers, when purchasing vehicles in the lowest interest rate environment, as you rightly say, for the last 31 years, take repayment ability and affordability into account completely. And if they can afford the installment on the asset, they're very happy to buy. And particularly when you get your vehicles getting to 5 or 6 years old and it's running out of maintenance plan, the costs could potentially ratchet up pretty quickly. So there's always that incentive to try and change and move into a different model.
Keith, if you have a look at what you just said was very important there. You said 5 or 6 years. It wasn't that long ago that 5 years was the maximum. It's suddenly been ratcheted up by institutions like yours to 6 years, which is great because it means things are more affordable. But is there a direct link between the NAMSA sales figures that we look at enthusiastically every month and the extra years loan finance? Yeah.
I think just before NCA with the Credit Agreements Act, the maximum probably 90% of the country could do was 54 months, so it's 4.5 years. The ability to now extend it up to 72 years and potentially add a balloon payment, up to 72 months, excuse me, and potentially add a balloon payment onto that particular finance period as well, reduces the repayment ability, the repayment amount monthly, quite substantially. So it does get more people into the market from an affordability perspective. It makes it easier to purchase those assets. But
one of the factors to consider as well is that while that is happening, you've got manufacturers becoming increasingly competitive, and dealers as well. So that adding, putting further incentive on the table in a very big way.
Yeah, the choice to the consumer in this country on the variables available on motor vehicles is huge, and I think it's one of the biggest options market. If you can consider what the options available on vehicles are compared to the rest of the world. We've got many variables on these assets, and to be able to make a choice on which vehicle you would want to purchase, it's got to be really competitive. So the dealers are under pressure on margins, the manufacturers are putting more extras into these motor vehicles and making it a really competitive environment.
Yeah.
Keith, it's also it's almost in a perverse sort of way, the rising cost of fuel. I mean, for goodness sake, we're at, what are we, around about 11, 12 rand a litre. I can't even bear to look as I go into the garage these days, but we're at elevated levels. It's almost as though that has driven car sales, because what people have done is adapted. They say, well, I'm going to have this large gas-guzzling 4x4, this large family saloon. I'm going to trade down a bit to something a little bit smaller and more affordable. And therefore, it's almost as though every couple of years you change that car because of the size of it and the cost of it. So in a way, it's almost as though, as I said, rising fuel costs have actually spurred the market.
Yeah, there's certainly a move to smaller, more efficient vehicles. We've seen that very clearly. But there is still a very strong demand for your premium vehicles, for your bigger vehicles that tend to...
There's a strong desire as well. And what's actually stands out in the report that you've issued is that, when it comes to predictions about the winners at the People's Wheels Awards, it's going to be tempered by the tendency of motorists to vote for brands or models they don't own themselves. And that's pretty interesting, because it shows that the aspiration is still there.
The South African market's very aspirational, and you can ask any of the consumers out there, they're always aspiring to drive something bigger, something better, or what they perceive to be bigger and better. Affordability, though, limits you in terms of what you can buy, but there's always that aspiration to buy higher. And if you can extend your payments, if you can add a balloon payment or residual value to it to make your payments a little bit less,
how does that influence just what manufacturers put on the table then for consumers? Because, it's one thing having a market or consumer market that aspires to drive something, and one thing, facing a consumer market and the reality of what they actually drive.
Yeah. Between the manufacturers and the banks and potentially the dealers, they try and make the overall payment ability of that asset on a monthly basis reduced. So the cost of the vehicle may be more, but they try and structure different deals and they try and add things onto the contract that makes the affordability monthly, because taking into account exactly the increase in the fuel price and potentially the tolls in Gauteng, it's becoming expensive to drive your own car. So we've got to be creative around how we do things.
Keith, are we getting ripped off in this country? If you look at the price of, say, an apartment in South Africa and an apartment in a European country, for example, and compare that to the price of a car, it seems to me that they're much closer in South Africa than in, for example, as I said, a European country.
Yeah, so
often
either
people say to me, why are your cars so expensive? What is it? Is it duties, or is it just a genuine case that because we're so aspirational, people think that they can bump up these prices?
Yeah, so either the house prices in our country are quite low, or the vehicle prices are a little bit high. But I think they're on the high side relative to the other economies. I think our cars are quite expensive relative to Europe and those sort of places. But that's driven by the location we are situated at on the African continent, how far it is to import these assets, the cost of labor in our country, and various other variables. But it is expensive.